You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250. This is where we remember events that took place 250 years ago this week. It's a short bonus episode from the American Revolution podcast to remember these important 250th anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week we remember the Battle of the Cedars, which took place on May 19th, 1776. After the British Relief Force arrived at Quebec on May 5th, the Patriots' days in Canada were numbered. Colonel Moses Hazen commanded Montreal. He dispatched Colonel Timothy Bettle and 400 soldiers to build a stockade at the Cedars. The Cedars was located about 30 miles upriver and to the west of Montreal. This would provide a defense against any surprise attack coming from further upriver against the city. After they arrived at the Cedars, Colonel Bettle left his second-in-command, Colonel Isaac Butterfield, in charge to build a stockade, while Bedell went off on his own to meet with the local Caughnawaga Indian tribe. He wanted to make sure that this local tribe would not cooperate with the British in any attack. Meanwhile, British Captain George Forster, with 40 regulars, got 200 Iroquois Indians and 10 local French Canadians to join him in an attack on the Americans. On May 15th, Colonel Bedell received word that this British-led Indian force was headed to attack his regiment at the Cedars. Rather than return to his regiment and take command, or even warn them, Bedell ran straight to Montreal to inform the command and ask for reinforcements. Whether this was outright cowardice or an error in judgment would be debated later. Officials in Montreal argued about sending a relief force. The two congressional delegates that were still in Montreal tried to issue orders. This led to a fight over authority with the officers in command. As a result, no relief force left for 2 days, when Major Henry Sherburne eventually took 140 Continental soldiers to support the garrison at the Cedars. Colonel Bedell started off with the relief column, but then decided he was too sick to march and returned to Montreal. On May 18th, the day after Sherburne's relief force left Montreal, the regulars and Iroquois surrounded the stockade at the Cedars. The defenders outnumbered the attackers and also had 2 small field cannons to defend their position. The men had sufficient food and supplies to defend themselves for days. The British commander, Captain Forster, decided to bluff. Implying that he had a much larger force, he called on the force inside the stockade to surrender immediately or suffer the full ravages of the attacking Indians. Almost immediately, Colonel Butterfield seemed ready to surrender, but only if the defenders could leave with their arms. Forster would not agree to the terms and began his attack. The defenders easily held their position, only one man suffering a minor shoulder wound. By the next morning, though, Colonel Butterfield still wanted to surrender. His junior officers thought this was crazy and debated a mutiny to put a more capable officer in command of the defense. But before they could do so, Butterfield signaled surrender, apparently unnerved at the prospect of being tortured and murdered by Indians. Forster's force took the entire garrison prisoner, captured all of their arms, ammunition, food, and supplies. As the men marched out of the stockade, the Indians stripped them of all their valuables, went through their pockets, and took their personal possessions as prizes of war. Sherburne's relief column, which had dwindled from 140 to about 100 men due to illnesses and having to post guards to cover a potential retreat and guard supplies, approached the Cedars hours after the troops had surrendered. Upon hearing that the garrison had already surrendered, Sherburne pulled back across the river and waited until the next morning to approach. When his column did march, the Indians ambushed them in open ground. The battle raged for about an hour, after which Sherburne surrendered unconditionally. The Indians took this to mean they could strip their captors of all their possessions, including their clothes. There were no regulars with the party, but a French-Canadian agent named Claude de Lorimer was with them and had to go to great lengths to keep the Indians from simply massacring the prisoners. Later, some accused the Indians of tomahawking and scalping several prisoners, though whether this really happened is debatable. It's possible that the Indians just scalped some of the dead after the battle. Lorimer and the Indians marched the naked prisoners back to a church where the prisoners from the Cedars were being held. At this point, the Indians decided that it was unfair that the Cedars prisoners got to keep their clothes while the relief column did not, so they proceeded to strip the rest of the prisoners of their clothes as well. The prisoners had to sleep in open fields with no food or clothing, and not allowed fires nor given any food. General Benedict Arnold soon received word of the fall of the Cedars and of Sherburne's relief force. He ran back to Montreal, where he grabbed every soldier he could find, a total of about 150 men. As he marched toward the Cedars, he collected more soldiers from various outposts, so that his force totaled about 450 by the time he got near the enemy, 5 days after they had captured the troops at the Cedars. Arnold was able to force the British and the Indians to release the prisoners, promising to release a similar number of prisoners in American custody in exchange. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. For more about this story, please check out episode 90 at blog.amrevpodcast.com. You can also subscribe for free to the whole podcast on whatever podcast platform you like. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.